Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Friday, May 6th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Notre Dame game is in 121 days, the game against Michigan in 205 days. A lot has changed about college football over the past few decades, and just about all of it can be traced back to one thing: television. From kickoff times to skyrocketing revenue and all the stuff that comes along with that, TV has had a huge impact on the sport, and with the Big Ten on the verge of signing a deal that could be worth $1 billion, with a B, billion dollars per season, that's only going to get more true in the future. So today we're going to talk about that and what TV is likely going to mean for the Buckeyes this fall. Matt Sarzyniak runs mattsars.com, which is an incredible resource for college sports TV. I can tell you pretty much everyone who covers this sport is well familiar with mattsars.com because it impacts our life quite a bit during the fall. He does projections of who will play on which channel and when each week, which is way more complicated than you'd think. He's here to explain all of that for us today. Matt, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Tom, for having me.
So one thing that I think, before we get started on all the specific game stuff, one thing that I think may have kind of slid under the radar a little bit in terms of college football TV is Kirk Herbstreit has a new job. He is going to be an analyst on the Thursday night NFL games on Amazon Prime. That came out a month or two ago, and it just didn't get a lot of notice when it happened. That's going to be very different from him. But, I mean, it sounds like it's probably not going to have a big impact on his college football TV duties.
No, that's correct, Tom. From what ESPN indicated, they'll still be using Kirk on their what would likely be their best football game, college football game each week, and college game day as well. ESPN and most television networks do advertising presentations in mid-May, and if for some reason Kirk decides to make a change, it might get announced at that time, but for now, it seems like it's all systems go for what Kirk's current duties are at ESPN alongside his new Amazon duties.
So you mentioned the what they're called upfronts in the TV business. You know, you're kind of showing off. Oh, look at all the exciting new programs we have coming this fall. Please advertise on them. And so you may start to see some of those college football. Some of the biggest games. Some of those may get announced during those upfronts. We talked in the middle of last fall on the show about some of the Buckeyes' upcoming games, and at that point, stuff was, 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out, something like that, when they might be on TV. And, you already have some projections in place for the first few weeks of the college football season, and some of that may be some of the stuff we could hear about in those upfronts in just a little later on this month. But, there are obviously a lot of moving parts with all this stuff right now. But the big question that everyone has, this is an Ohio State-centered podcast, so let's just get the question that everyone has out of the way right now. The season opener against Notre Dame, will it be a primetime game? Can you let people know where you're projecting that game right now, and then all the different factors that go into it, because there is a lot that goes into projecting that right now.
Sure, my belief is that the game will be a primetime game on ABC. Through the Big Ten conveying their rights to ESPN and Fox, and along with BTN, they'll draft games in a particular order, and Fox always goes first, and it seems like every year their decision is to take the annual Michigan-Ohio State game first. And usually that leaves ABC with the next best available game to choose throughout the year. And ABC gets a handful of games available to them when it comes to Notre Dame each year. They're all road games. And it's usually, Notre Dame at an ACC school, or Notre Dame at a Big Ten school, for example, and they don't make many visits, or I can't think of the last time they visited Columbus, if at all.
1995.
Okay, thank you. So it's pretty rare, and it's just got that cachet to it where you've got two mid-America schools, Midwest schools, coming together, rarely play, and it's kind of got a little bit of magic and mystique to it. So that's where I think it'll end up being the primetime game that week. ESPN also has a Georgia-Oregon game that they'll probably end up airing in mid-afternoon. And then beyond that, it's kind of pieces and parts of what's available. There's not much in that first week. They'll have Florida State, LSU likely on Sunday night as well. But in terms of the best available game for them that week, and really overall for the season, Notre Dame, Ohio State should be a very big draw for them.
All right, and we are several years now. I think this is year 4 for the Big Noon Kickoff era, and that has been a massive success for Fox. That was something that they came out with, and it was like, well, this is either really going to work or it's really not going to work, and it has really worked for them, which has then led to a bunch of grumbling from Ohio State fans about all these games being noon games. Last year, that massive Ohio State-Oregon game, week 2, was the Big Noon Kickoff game, week 2. This year, week 2, there could be another very, very, very big, a very, very, very big game on that Big Noon Kickoff game for week 2. Why are you thinking Alabama and Texas could be that Fox Big Noon game week 2?
Sure. So there's a lot that goes into this, and similar to the Big Ten with ESPN and Fox Sports, the Big 12 also has a game or a selection order draft that they run through. And it's a little bit different in that Fox gets the first overall pick in even-numbered years, and ESPN gets it in odd-numbered years. In 2022, being an even-numbered year, I have them, Fox taking first. And then, in that case, most years, you would end up with the Bedlam game,
Red River.
Oklahoma, Texas, first overall most years. And there's been exceptions to that. A few years back, it's believed that ABC took LSU, Texas first over Red River. And that's kind of where I'm leaning here as well. Fox, for regular season, really hasn't had a chance to choose a game involving Alabama. Obviously, they don't have SEC rights. And Alabama doesn't play many true road games. So for them to have a chance at this and have essentially the field cleared for them, I have it going ahead of Red River this year. They might have one other chance at Red River in 2024. They obviously had a chance at it a couple years ago in the situation I mentioned where LSU Texas was picked ahead of it, so it fell in Fox's lap. So maybe they'll have 2 more chances at it. But I look at it, and Alabama is much like Ohio State. They're a ratings draw. People watch them. People watch because they love them. People watch because they hate them. And having Texas as a similar, bellwether with respect to college football ratings, I see that as that top choice. And because Fox's marketing strategy is typically around noon games, that's why I have it at noon. Yes, it stinks because there are heat considerations in that area of the country, in early September still. Typically, they wouldn't put that game at 4 o'clock and have something else. There are rare exceptions where Fox puts their best game in the middle of the day. One of them being Penn State, Iowa last year, and that actually was due to Ohio State having their homecoming being a 12 o'clock game. So I do see Alabama, Texas being kind of that rare exception where it supersedes Red River and ends up being Fox's noon game.
All right, and so if Alabama, Texas is the noon kickoff on week 2, I have bad news for Ohio State fans who want to go to the Ohio State-Arkansas State game. You've got that as a noon kick on Big Ten Network, so you may have to choose. There. And, a noon kick on Big Ten Network, that kind of makes sense. Like, this is not a particularly exciting game, probably. So that makes sense. But however, the week after that, you've got Toledo and the Buckeyes, which is another one that looks like, Ohio State should be favored by 5 touchdowns, whatever the number is. You've got them projected in a very high-profile spot. So why do you think that could end up as the Big Noon Kickoff game for week 3?
So when it comes to Ohio State games on BTN, they only have to have 2 a year. And with the Arkansas State game, where I'm projecting that to be on BTN in week 2, one other game throughout the year, maybe it's Rutgers, maybe it's another game, would end up being the Buckeyes require Big Ten opponent on BTN. So getting that out of the way, even if it's Toledo and a MAC opponent ends up being a blowout, it still has probably more value to television networks. I've got it probably as like the second or third best, Big Ten game that week. Oklahoma, Nebraska, I would say is probably above that at this point. Either way, though, Ohio State at noon, you're showcasing Ohio State, and that's really what Fox is looking at. And they've done this before. They've had blowouts at noon, and they still, they'll draw 3.5, 4 million, and they'll be fine with it.
So one more, and this is, you have projected the first, week 0 to week 3. I'm going to look a little further down the line because this is something that we get. This is actually one of the games we talked about the last time we talked last fall. Ohio State, Penn State. That is, this is a year that Ohio State goes to Penn State. That game is October 29th. So in my little amateur TV scheduler mode, when Ohio State, Michigan is the first pick, then ABC/ESPN takes Ohio State, Notre Dame. There's an argument that Ohio State, Penn State is the third best game. That would be the next pick. And if Fox picks that, that's October 29th. That's during the World Series. If that happens, Penn State could not do the primetime whiteout thing. I don't know if you've started looking at that yet. Do you have any sense for, is that likely? Could the Ohio State Penn State game happen at Penn State and not be the primetime whiteout game?
I haven't looked too far down the road on that. I did put together some cursory notes about, hey, looking at some of these way too early top 25 lists and finding the Big Ten schools that are in there and potential non-conference opponents. What games could be top choices? And besides the Ohio State-Penn State game that you mentioned, I'm looking at Ohio State-Michigan State, Iowa-Ohio State, Michigan-Iowa. So those all fit in there as well. And also on the date that you mentioned, October 29th, you also have Michigan State-Michigan. And that could be a value for, instead of, Fox taking that as the third pick, they may say, well, we just want top pick on October 29th, and it could be one of those two games. But as you mentioned, the World Series takes out a prime time window for Fox, and they may just say, whichever game it is, it's going to be at noon, and it's going to lead into maybe another game, and then on into our World Series coverage.
Yeah, and that Michigan State game last year, that ended up being one of the 10 most watched college football games of the season. I think that one got more eyeballs than Ohio State Penn State did last year, which, I think that may have been a sort of unique circumstance where they think they were both undefeated, or, one of them was 7-1 and one of them was 8-0, whatever it was. So a little bit of a unique circumstance there, but yeah, that's a really interesting kind of wrinkle there in terms of trying to figure this stuff out. And that's, one small example of how complicated this stuff is. My favorite, though, before I'm going to let you go on this one, my favorite nugget from everything you've put out so far this year is that the Pittsburgh Pirates, yes, the really lousy baseball team, the Pittsburgh Pirates, might make a difference in which college football game you're watching one primetime night this week. It was week 2 or week 3, I think, this season. Can you explain that? Because that just seemed to me like the absolute perfect example of how many moving pieces there really are here in trying to sort this stuff out.
Sure. So in week 2, Pitt is hosting Tennessee, part of a home-and-home series that they have. And on September 10th, the Pirates are also hosting a game at 6:30 p.m. And the issue around this, if you've ever been to the city of Pittsburgh, you'll notice that the baseball stadium, PNC Park and Heinz Field, are, I think, within 2 blocks of each other. And they share a lot of common parking lots and a lot of common infrastructure. So ingress, egress, tailgating, all of that stuff. To get that done, the two teams really can't play at the same time. And I know you can kind of say, well, the Pirates, by that time, they'll be so far out of the race, nobody will be attending those games anyways. Whether that's the case or not, it doesn't seem to really matter. There's been a couple instances where there's been conflicts going close to 20 years back. In 2000, I think I wrote in 2005, but it's actually 2006. Michigan State visited Pitt, and originally the game was announced as an 8 p.m. regional kick on ABC. And at the time, they didn't check with the Pirates, and it started to be something that percolated over the summer, and then it got to July, and there was an announcement made that Michigan State at Pitt was suddenly going to kick off at noon. Essentially, the Pirates won that battle, kicked the Pitt game up in the afternoon. Instead of being that regional telecast on ABC, it was still regionally shown on ABC in about 5 markets, and it was shown on ESPN2 in the rest of the country. And the ESPN2 game that day, I believe, was BYU Boston College, and it got shown in even less markets. The other game where there was give on the Pirates' part was Penn State's visit to Pitt a few years ago. The Pirates game ended up getting moved to earlier in the day, and the Pitt-Penn State game ended up being in prime time. And one of the reasons behind that as well is there was goodwill attached to it. Pirate fans are likely going to be Pitt and Penn State fans, and why tick off 2 fan bases, by moving their game up in that case? So the Pirates made the judgment that, hey, we'll go earlier in the day, clear out, let all these fans come in. But Tennessee Pitt, you're looking at week 2. I ended up projecting USC Stanford as ABC's primetime game because I thought, well, this will be the first conference game for USC under new head coach Lincoln Riley. There would be a few more eyeballs on that, a bit more intrigue. It also gets ABC out of its minimum of 1 Pac-12 game in prime time, its requirement to have that taken care of. So I went with that. But looking at that, Tennessee Pitt, and also Miami, Texas A&M might get a look. But that's why you've got so many other things that are moving parts, whether it's television networks that might be airing certain things with respect to regional airings of whether it's baseball or other sports, and in this case, just the infrastructure of the city of Pittsburgh not lending itself well to having 2 events in that short amount of city space.
There you go. The parking lots around Heinz Field and PNC Park and why they might change the football game you're watching on week 2 in prime time. This is why this stuff is best left to the professionals, and luckily Matt Sars is the best professional at this in the world. So Matt, let them know. Folks who are listening right now obviously find this stuff very interesting if they've listened to us talk about this for the whole time. So let people know where they can find you on Twitter, and then where they can find your website as well.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Matt Sars, MattsArz, and then at mattsarssports.com. And you'll find the weeks for both football and men's basketball during the season.
All right. And definitely, I have that one bookmarked. You should bookmark it too, and definitely follow Matt on Twitter as well. Always lots of good information there. One more thing before I let you go. One scheduling note. This is a little further out. This is probably too far out for even Matt to project. The Ohio State-Boston College football series just got moved on Thursday afternoon. The Buckeyes and Boston College are now playing in the 2035 and 2036 seasons. And in the spirit of this podcast, I will let you know that the 2035 Boston College game in 4,881 days. Not sure we're going to add that to the daily countdown, but now you can start counting down in your own mind if you want to. So there you go. One more schedule change for the Buckeyes. So that'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you on Monday.